Welcome to this video in which we will investigate and build together an interface between Godot and a Python backend using Flask. We will be constructing this little interface in which this is just an example. We have a little login screen which sends the login over here and a password over here. On the Python backend, we can access it as username and password. We make sure it's the same one as we're setting up over here, which could be eventually a database or something else. And we just say if it's okay or wrong. So for example, if I type 1 and 1, I go to my Godot page, my status is okay. If I do something else, it's actually wrong. And on my backend, I can also see what I'm actually typing coming from the front end, coming from Godot. We are going to start with this as more like a boilerplate or a conceptual video to introduce the idea of splitting your logic between a Python server-like code and a proper Godot game or web app, which would be actually running on the user's machine. And with this, in the future, we'll be able to also use other things from Python, for example, machine learning or database connections or many other things. So stick with me and we'll get there. So first things first, we need some other programs installed together with Godot so that we can do the backend implementation as well. Python is the main thing that we are going to use here in this tutorial. I believe you maybe already have Python installed or are at least familiar with what Python is, since it's very similar to GDScript. So I'll take my chances and say you have experience of how to use Python already. And if you don't, we'll go through the very basics in this tutorial. We'll also need a separate IDE or text editor to also edit the Python files. You can either use, for example, Visual Studio Code, or another example is PyCharm, which is the one that I'm going to use because I'm more familiar with it. Or there are other possibilities as well, so feel free to choose whatever suits you best. The folder structure that I'm going to use for this tutorial will have actually two folders within. Inside the web apps simple, which is the tutorial that I'm going to talk about in this video, I'll have two main folders, one for the Python files and Python backend, which will be this server folder, and the other one is this Godot server or Godot folder that will contain the Godot project itself. And when configuring Python, remember to include also the virtual environment, as I'm doing here. PyCharm lets me do this fairly simple, and you can see here, I'm doing the proper folder inside the simple server file. And after creating the two projects, you'll have what I have here, the same thing. In the Godot folder, I have the Godot project, which is open over here. And in the server folder, I have my Python environment set up with virtual environment over here. And I also added a git ignore just so this virtual environment folder is not committed to GitHub. So just as an example, let's do something very simple first. Let's make a login screen where the user or the player can use it to log into his account. And this is what I've created so far. As you can see here, I have a control node as my root node, and I use a panel container to override the style box so that I can make this little nice box around everything that I want. If you want to create your own, you can just come here and new style box flat. This one is the one that I'm using. You can also try different ones, but this one is more useful for this kind of things, I believe. I created a background color which I just put around near white. I also added some width with a black border around everything. Once again, you can do this in many ways. This is a design choice, so feel free to change. I also added some radius, so the corner is a little bit more rounded, as you can see. And I put a little bit of shadow with size 5 so that there's like a little shadow around it. To me, it looks good. I also use a margin container just so that I have a little bit of space around everything that I have inside. So everything is inside here. A VBox container, which will stack everything vertically. I'll have just my welcome to my game label, in which I set my vertical to expand, and at the same time, where is it? Yeah, and stretch ratio to 4, just so it uses more of my space. This would change how much of the space it actually uses, but for now I think this is good. I put a little separator here, and I use a grid container to properly align everything that I have here. I think it's easier than trying to align with VBox and HBoxes. I added 2 labels. I overrode the color of all my labels over here to black. I could also do it with theme if you guys know how to use themes, but for now I think this is good. In my password, I also enabled secret so that if I type anything in my password, it will be like this. A little new separator and a final button. So this is just the UI. I haven't done anything else yet. So now I'm setting up how to collect my user and password. To do that, I created a new script. If you don't know how to do it, just select the control node and click this button. It will create your script over here. And let's also tie in, when I click this button, do something. So I can go over here to node, double click the pressed, and say I want to put something in my control node. So here it is. And the main node that I'm going to use to do calls to the backend will be this one, HTTP request. You can take a look on the documentation. To reach this page, you can come to help, search, and type HTTP request. You'll find this page fairly simply. And I'll just copy paste this code over here to have a boilerplate code to use for my future development. And going through this boilerplate code, just in case you never did something similar to this, I'll run through what it does. So first, it just creates a new node and adds a child so that it appears here when I run the code. Notice that this is running in the ready function. So it runs once when this control node, which is this node here, is instantiated. So once this is instantiated, a new child node will be added here, which is the HTTP request. I make sure to connect in a similar fashion that I'm connecting over here to the right. I can also connect in code using this connect function as well. And I'm connecting the request completed signal to this function over here, or this method over here. I do a request, so by default this is going to do a get request with no parameters. I make sure there's no error, so this is just to check if the request had any error. And once the request is finished and the result is returned to Godot, this method here will be run, and I basically get some information from within and print it. So instead of doing this call in the ready function, what we'll actually do is this call over here, and we'll not do a get request, we'll do another request, a post request. Coming back to the documentation, once again coming to help and search, you can see how this request actually works. It uses these parameters, body may be optional. And the first parameter here is method. This method can be, if I click here, can be the get, can be post, put, delete options. So these are different types of HTTP requests. The one that we're going to use is very similar to this example here, in which you see in this last line, I'm using a post request. I'm saying I want this URL with these headers over here. It's good to have URL encoded in case you have spaces in between or something like that. And a query string, which will be how we pass the username and password. You see, it's very similar to what we are trying to do. And this request that I just showed you is from this class. HTTP client. HTTP client uses, like, it's more low level compared to the HTTP request, which is over here, saying it's a higher level alternative. You can also try to use this one instead of the other one, but in my experience, HTTP request is the one to go. So we're going to use this request call from the HTTP request, which is also fairly similar. We can check it over here. And here are the parameters for the HTTP request method. Just copy this back also to remember what I'm doing. Copy this. Yeah, there we go. And we are going to use this request with more information, and instead of just putting here the URL itself. And with this, we have set up when I click on the button, I'll send some information, which I actually should get from these parameters. And I'll add these fields as the body part. If you don't remember, 2 is the post request. I'm not actually putting any kind of header. This could be useful in future more specialized things, but for this basic tutorial, I don't actually need any headers. Also, I'm not using SSL, which is when you go to a web page, there's some little lock to say the messages between you and the server are encrypted. I'm doing localhost, so I'm connecting to my own computer. I don't have SSL enabled. So for testing purposes, this is fine. If you ever actually deploy this in a web server in the future, do remember to change this to true and enable SSL in your server. So now let's set up on the other side the Python code. In the Python side, or the server side, what we're going to use is Flask. So this is a framework, or like a very good library that allows us to build a minimum web application, server application in Python. So if you just copy paste this code over here into a Python class, and make sure also that Flask is installed in your virtual environment, everything should be fine. So let's do just this. If you come to the terminal in PyCharm, or however you're actually using, you'll notice that you can use pip, which is how you install new packages into the Python environment that you have. In our case, we want to install Flask, and we can create a file. I'll just call it app, and let me go back and copy this code here and paste it over here. So if you're using just the command line, you can try to run it using Python app in the command line, or you can also use PyCharm itself to try to run. Just right click and use run app. So we'll be able to run the app. Notice that there are 2 ways of setting up Python to run a Flask app. One is to use this, set up a Flask environment variable, and then do this -m Flask run. This is one possibility. Another one that I find just simpler to use is guarantee that my name is main, which basically means I'm running the main thread, and this is the main file that is being run by Python. So if this is a file that I'm running as a root node, I just do app.run. There are some parameters that I can include here, which I'll include fairly soon, but this is enough for the Flask web app to be running. So now it's running in this URL and this port. And you can check this by going to your web browser and just typing the URL like this. So hello world is the string that is being generated from this path. So basically this means that if I receive a call with nothing after the last slash, so it's just the pure URL like this, return this string. This could be something else, something like this. If I just save, I need actually to rerun everything, or I can say debug equals true while I'm debugging only. This is important. If it's debug equals true, when I change something here in the file, it will just, and I save, it will rerun the server. It's a little bit faster this way. And here, if I call it again, this will be updated. Notice I'm right now returning a string, but this could be also a dictionary, for example. Hi, one maybe, saved, loaded, and now this is a JSON. You see everything changed, and I'm seeing a JSON file. This is very important because we're going to use JSON to go back and forth between Python and Godot. Now to set up the post route that I want, I just copy pasted this and made sure that my login path, so now instead of being the root is the login, similar to how I set up in Godot. You see here I'm using login, it's the same thing. And I also add this methods part in saying basically if I call this, I only want to accept this call if it's a post call. In this case here, by default, methods is get. So this is why I could call here purely like this, because this is a get request. If I do this now, it'll say method is not allowed because a get request is not allowed. Only a post request is allowed. And to test out APIs in general, I highly recommend to use this program called Postman. You could also use your own web browser with some apps, but like this is the most easy and straightforward way to do all your testing. So for example, here I can just install this, click new, and I added the get request here of the root call. If I hit send, it will return me the hi. If I click on the login, it will also give me the method not allowed, but now I can change from get to post. And now I have something else because the post expects a different type of return. So you can see here there's a internal server error. If I go back to PyCharm, I can see what the error is, because right here I'm trying to return a dictionary like this. But you see, return time must be a string dict tuple, or this is not a dictionary. This is a problem. This is a set, and now I change to a dictionary. So in case you don't know, a set is similar to an array but with no ordering, and a dictionary is the dictionary you expect from Godot as well. So if I save like this, it will restart everything. I can go back to Postman, and now I have my output coming from this place. And now finally, to simulate the username and password that we are passing from Godot to Python, I just went to the body here, I clicked raw, clicked JSON, just so it's easier to type in, and I typed in this. And on the other side, I'm printing the request.json. Just add a request over here on the import to make sure I'm importing also this library. And I do request.json to get a JSON formatted request data, as you can see here. I'm just printing out this. If I change this, it will print out the proper thing over here. And now back to Godot. Let's make this everything work properly. So I've added here in the HTTP request the port that I was missing, and also a parse field to make sure that this field goes from this dictionary to a string, which is what is expected here in this method. So now if I run this and just send anything, I'll receive the information from my server. And in my server, I can see there's actually something a little bit wrong on this. And this is mostly because of the header. So let's go fix this first. There are many ways to do this fix for the headers. But in my case, just to showcase to you, you can see that here in Postman, everything was working properly, right? If you come to the header tabs and click, say, code, you can see what is the proper header that this Postman call is doing. So there is a header saying that my content type is JSON. So if we do the same thing in Godot, it should work properly. Now I've included in this posting array, which are my custom headers, the exact same string that I got from Postman. So basically saying that my input here should be of JSON type. This allows my Python code to properly get what is a JSON here and print it out. Yeah, you can see it's now printing out properly what I'm passing over here. And this actually concludes what I was going to tell you about in this tutorial in specific, because this tutorial was an introduction to the concept of splitting the logic between the front-end code, which is the game itself or the application made by Godot, and the server code, which would be running somewhere else and not in your own computer, at least in the future. Right now, we just did this simple kind of login function, which actually does nothing. Let's say I will return status, and I'll just make sure that, say, this JSON should match something that I already have here. For example, I have my login can be something like, so if my JSON is the same as my login, I will say okay, otherwise I'll say wrong. And so a little fix that I did just to make sure my username and password was working properly, I changed it to strings because it was just numbers before and this was getting some issues, and I did a better check over here, not checking by dictionary but by the parameters themselves. So now everything is working properly. I come here, I can see this, I can see over here which I'm printing, and back on my Godot I see status okay or status wrong if I actually type something else. In the future, we'll be using the functionality that is available for us in Python to exploit machine learning, database connections, and we need to do this basic introductory video so that we can get to that in the future. So see you next time.